The trade route went dark on a Tuesday. Not slowly, not with warning. One moment, 17 ships were moving cargo through the outer spur corridor, fuel cells, grain compounds, medical equipment bound for 3 different colony worlds. The next moment, the automated relay beacon stopped sending. No distress ping, no emergency burst, just a clean, flat line of nothing where 17 signals used to be. The report hit the Galactic Union Council floor 40 minutes later. The council chamber was a wide, circular room built into the belly of orbital station Verath, a structure so old that the original builders were now extinct. The chamber seated delegates from 61 species. Most of them were arguing about a new import tariff when the silence report came through. The arguing stopped. 61 delegates read the same words at the same time. Then the arguing started again, louder. Councillor Preth stood at his station on the upper ring. He was Velunian tall, with a rigid exoskeleton the color of old amber, and 4 compound eyes that could track movement in almost total darkness. He was also, by most measurements, the most powerful voice on the council floor. He had held his seat for 32 years. He had seen wars start from smaller reports than this one. He read the silence data twice. Then he looked across the chamber to the lower delegate ring, where the smaller member species sat. The human delegation occupied 3 seats near the back. 2 of the seats held young diplomatic aides who were already talking quietly into their comm pieces. The 3rd seat held a woman who was doing nothing. She was not talking, not typing, not looking at her display screen. She was sitting with both hands resting flat on the table in front of her, reading the report with the kind of stillness that belonged to people who had already decided something. Her name was Dara Holt. She held the rank of Admiral in the United Earth Fleet, a title that meant very little to most species in the room. Earth's fleet was small by Union standards. Scout ships mostly, light transports, a few patrol vessels that other species used as training exercises. Humans had been Union members for 40 years and had never once contributed meaningful military force to any joint operation. They sent diplomats. They sent food shipments. They sent doctors to disaster zones. They were useful. They were not powerful. Preth watched Dara Holt for a moment, then looked away. There was no point in watching the human delegation during a military crisis. They had nothing to offer. The Dravosi Dominion's representative, a scarred, heavy-built reptilian named Kavath, stood and addressed the floor. He spoke in the flat, declarative style his species used for everything, making every sentence sound like a sentence of death. He said the Dravosi Dominion had no involvement in the disappearance of the convoy. He said the corridor in question ran near Dravosi-claimed expansion space, and that the Union should reconsider its routing habits. He said this without apology. 3 delegates immediately began shouting. 2 more filed formal objections. Preth called for order twice before the room settled into something close to functional. The data that followed was worse than the silence. Long-range sensor sweeps from the nearest Union relay post had caught fragments of what happened in the corridor. Not footage, the relay was too far for visual, but energy signatures, weapon discharge patterns, the kind of high-yield plasma burns that only Dravosi military-grade cannons produced. 17 ships burned clean out of existence, not captured, not boarded, destroyed. 3 weeks ago, the Dravosi had done the same thing to a Union patrol ship near the Karath Nebula. The Council had issued a formal protest. The Dominion had not replied. Now 17 more ships were gone. Preth called for a vote on emergency fleet deployment. The Union's combined patrol fleet was not large, but it was enough to signal intent. He needed 31 votes to pass the measure. He counted heads while he spoke. He was fairly confident he had the numbers. What he did not have was time. A second alert rolled across every display in the chamber while he was still mid-sentence. Another corridor had gone silent, this one closer. 40 ships, a larger route, more cargo, more people, gone. The chamber noise stopped being debate and became something closer to panic. Preth gripped the edge of his station and kept his voice level. He called for an immediate recess to allow delegations to consult their home governments. He requested that Union security forces move to elevated readiness. He asked for calm. Then he noticed that the human delegation seat, the one with the still woman, was empty. Dara Holt was gone. No one had seen her leave. One of her aides was still seated, looking at his calm piece with the expression of someone receiving instructions he had not expected. When Preth sent a floor assistant to ask where the admiral had gone, the aide looked up with a perfectly neutral face and said she had been called away on a routine matter. Preth stared at the empty seat for a moment longer than he meant to. In 61 species of council delegates, in 32 years of service, he had learned to notice the things that did not make noise. He had learned that silence was sometimes louder than shouting. He did not know why the empty chair of a minor member species troubled him. He returned to the floor, called the chamber back to order, and pushed the deployment vote through with 34 in favor. The measure passed. Orders went out to the Union patrol fleet. Diplomatic channels opened toward the Dravosi Dominion. Contingency plans moved from shelves to active desks. No one mentioned the humans. Somewhere between stars, something very large and very quiet had begun to move. The asteroid had no name on any Union chart. It appeared as a dead rock in a dead system, no orbit of value, no mineral content worth surveying, no reason for any ship to stop there. The system's star had burned out 400 years ago. The whole place was cold and lightless and forgotten. That was exactly why Earth had chosen it. Oren Saul had lived inside that asteroid for 11 years. He had been assigned to the project at age 24, fresh out of Earth's deep space engineering program, told to pack for a long posting, told not to tell his family where he was going, only that he would be safe and that the work mattered. He had packed. He had gone. He had never once regretted it, though there were nights when he thought about the sky above his childhood home and missed it with a physical ache. He was standing at the primary activation console when the order came through. 2 words in Admiral Holt's voice, clear, unhurried, the way she said everything. "Wake her up." Oren relayed the order through 4 separate authorization channels. Each channel required a physical key, a voice confirmation, and a biometric scan. Earth had built redundancy into everything on this project. No single person, no single failure, no single moment of bad judgment could activate what was sleeping in this rock without the full chain saying yes. All 4 chains said yes. The lights changed first. Emergency amber strips along every corridor shifted to full white. Then came the sound, a low, bone-deep vibration that was less a noise and more a feeling, the way a mountain might feel if it decided to wake up. Then the power readings on Oren's console began climbing, slowly at first, then faster. The ship was 30 years old and had never fired a weapon. She was 14 kilometers long. Her builders had called her the Relentless, not as a boast, but as a reminder. The people who designed her were people who remembered what Earth had nearly lost twice in 40 years of Union membership. The first time, a species called the Vethori had decided humanity was incompatible with galactic community and sent a sterilization fleet to the Sol system. Earth survived by the narrowest margin, with borrowed Union ships and a great deal of luck. The second time, a rogue faction detonated a chain weapon near Jupiter that killed 400,000 people. Earth survived that too, also by luck. Earth's government had looked at both events and made a quiet decision. Luck was not a defense policy. They had not built a fleet. A fleet would have been noticed. A fleet would have changed Earth's political position in the Union, drawn attention, sparked arms race fears across a dozen species. A fleet would have made enemies before it ever prevented a war. They had built one ship. One ship could be hidden. One ship was the last resort, the thing you showed only when everything else had already failed. One ship was a line in the sand, not an invasion. Earth had spent 30 years building the most capable single vessel in the known galaxy, crewed it with 4,200 people who had signed away their right to tell anyone what they were doing, and then they had waited. Orin had been part of the third generation of that waiting. The Relentless had full fabrication bays. She could build her own replacement components without resupply. She carried 300 fighter craft and 40 drop-capable landers. Her hospital wing handled 800 casualties simultaneously. Her hull was layered from 17 different materials, some derived from alien tech Earth had spent decades quietly studying, some invented by Earth's own engineers in the dark of this dead system. She had weapons, but they were the last thing her designers had added, and the first thing they had hoped would never be used. She had never been outside this asteroid, not once. Now her engines were coming online for the first time in conditions that were not a drill. Orin watched the power readings and felt something hard to name, not quite pride, not quite fear, something between the two. His comm beeped, a crew lead on Deck 7. Sir, rotation sleep is complete on all sections. 3,000 people awake and standing by. The other 1,200 are cycling up. 20 minutes to full readiness. Understood. Start pre-departure sequence. Check the outer dock seals. She hasn't had vacuum exposure since the last drill. Already on it, sir. He closed the comm and looked through the observation port. Through carved rock he could only see the ship, her hull filling his entire field of view, enormous and gray and impossibly patient. He thought about the council chamber. 2 corridors gone dark, 40 ships burned to nothing. An empire that had decided the galaxy belonged to whoever was willing to take it. He thought about Dara Holt, already moving through dead corridors toward the docking approach. He thought about the people who built this ship without ever seeing it fly. Then he turned back to his console and began the work. Outside, the asteroid cracked open along lines engineered into it 30 years ago, seemed so precise they looked natural, until the rock face simply fell away. And behind it, something vast and silent and awake looked out at the stars for the very first time. The Dravosi fleet commander was a being named Groth, and Groth had never known fear in the military sense of the word. He had fought in 9 campaigns. He had taken 4 contested systems. He had watched Union patrol ships scatter before his advance fleet like debris in a solar wind, and he had felt the particular satisfaction of a predator who has correctly identified the weakest points in a structure before pushing through them. The Galactic Union was old and slow and full of species that had forgotten what real force looked like. Groth had spent his career reminding them. He was reminding them again now. The convoy was 41 cargo ships, grain haulers and fuel transports, moving through a neutral corridor near the gas giant the locals called Verath's Eye. They had no escort. The Union's patrol fleet was scrambling somewhere in the wrong direction, responding to the first corridor he had emptied 3 days ago. This convoy had no idea what was coming until Groth's 40 warships dropped out of FTL travel and formed a containment arc around them. He gave the convoy a single instruction: cut engines and prepare for boarding. Standard procedure. Some of them would try to run. A few always did. He had already assigned intercept pairs to each ship. Then every sensor on his bridge stopped making sense. The readings came in fragmented at first, the kind of fragmentation his crew associated with sensor malfunction, because no object with those spatial dimensions existed in a combat-relevant context. His lead sensor officer recalibrated twice before she looked up from her station with an expression Groth had never seen on her face. "Commander, something just came out of FTL, 800 kilometers off our starboard arc." Classification. She opened her mouth, closed it, looked back at her readings. "I cannot classify it, sir. The profile does not match anything in the database. The closest match is a small moon, but it is moving under power and it is accelerating toward us." Groth turned to the main display. The thing that had appeared in space to his starboard was not a moon. A moon did not have running lights. A moon did not have engine signatures on 17 separate thruster arrays. A moon did not have weapon port configurations visible on long-range optical, hundreds of them, running the entire length of a hull that his display was still struggling to fully render because it was too large to fit in the standard tactical frame. She was not moving fast. She did not need to. She held position at 800 kilometers and did nothing. No weapon lock, no jamming signal, no broadcast warning. She simply existed, an object so far outside Groth's frame of reference that his brain kept trying to categorize her as terrain rather than a vessel. On orbital station Verath, 6 light minutes away, the council chamber had gone completely silent. Every long-range relay in the sector had picked up the energy signature of the FTL drop. Counselor Preth was standing at his station with the tactical overlay in front of him, watching a shape appear on the display that made no geometric sense in a military context. He asked his aide to pull the registration signal. The aide pulled it, read it twice, then read it a third time. "It is a United Earth vessel," the aide said. "Designation UES Relentless." No one in the chamber spoke for a full 10 seconds. Back in the corridor, Groth found his voice. "Identification query, now." His comms officer sent the standard Union query signal. The response came back in 11 seconds in Dravosi. Clean, precise, grammatically correct Dravosi, which the humans were absolutely not supposed to speak. The voice was a woman's. It was completely calm. "This is Admiral Dara Holt of the United Earth ship Relentless. You will release that convoy. You will withdraw from this corridor. You will not be asked again." Groth stared at his display. 40 warships, fully armed, combat-ready, against one vessel. One vessel that was larger than anything he had ever seen, but was still one vessel. And the woman piloting it was speaking his language like she had grown up in the Dominion. He had not built his career on being afraid of things larger than him. He had built it on striking first. He gave the order. 38 of his 40 ships opened fire simultaneously. The volley that crossed 800 kilometers of space was the single largest combined weapons discharge the corridor had ever experienced. Plasma bolts, kinetic rounds, disruptor beams, a wall of destructive force that would have reduced any known vessel in the galaxy to vapor. The Relentless took every hit. She did not move. She did not roll. She did not vent atmosphere or spin debris. Where the plasma bolts struck her hull, the surface glowed a deep, pulsing amber that spread outward from each impact point like heat moving through metal, and then faded. The kinetic rounds flattened against her like rain on rock. The disruptor beams scattered across a surface that simply refused to be disrupted. When the firing stopped, she looked exactly the same as before. In the council chamber, Counselor Preth had not blinked in 40 seconds. Around him, 60 delegates watched their displays in absolute silence. On the Dravosi bridge, Groth's lead sensor officer said, very quietly, "No damage detected. Hull integrity appears unchanged." Groth said nothing. The comm channel opened again. The same woman's voice, still calm. The same way a very deep ocean is calm, not because nothing is happening in it, but because it is too large to be disturbed by ordinary things. "Your turn is over." There is a particular kind of silence that happens when something expected does not occur. The Dravosi fleet had fired everything. The expected outcome, the only outcome that had ever followed such a volley in the history of Dominion warfare, was destruction, wreckage, the satisfying, final silence of a problem that no longer existed. What followed instead was a different kind of silence, the kind that comes before a demonstration. The Relentless moved. Not fast, she was too large for fast to mean what it normally meant. She moved with the slow, unavoidable momentum of a geological event. She crossed the 800-kilometer gap at a speed that gave Groth's fleet exactly enough time to understand what was happening before it was already happening to them. Her forward weapon systems activated. Not the large-bore cannons mounted along her primary hull, the small ones, the precise ones. The first Dravosi ship lost its propulsion array in a single focused pulse, not an explosion, not a hull breach, just a precise burn that separated the drive assembly from its power coupling at 3 exact points. The ship went dark and began to drift. Its crew was alive. Its hull was intact. It simply could not go anywhere. The second ship lost its weapon systems, then its backup power relay. In that order, the crew inside experienced a series of controlled failures, each one targeted, none of them lethal. The third ship, the fourth, the fifth. Oren watched from the tactical station and counted. He was keeping a time log. He had started it when the first pulse fired. At 4 minutes and 30 seconds, 12 Dravosi ships were disabled. At 7 minutes 26. At 10 minutes and 51 seconds, the last of the 40 warships went quiet, every one of them intact, every crew member alive, every ship simply unable to move, unable to fire, unable to communicate on any frequency except a single open channel that the Relentless had left available, the one they could use to call for rescue. Groth was on that channel before his bridge finished going dark. He was not asking for rescue. He was demanding an explanation. Dara Holt answered him personally. She had boarded the Relentless 3 hours ago, moved through the corridors at a pace her crew would have described as unhurried, and taken her station on the command deck without ceremony. She had watched the weapons engagement from a seated position with a cup of something warm in her hand. She told Groth the following. His fleet would be recovered by Union rescue ships within 6 hours. His crews would be treated according to Union medical standards, which were, she noted, considerably better than Dravosi field medicine. The 40 ships would be impounded pending a Union review of the corridor attacks. No Dravosi soldier had been harmed today, and none would be, provided no further hostile action was attempted. The Dominion's High Command would receive a full record of this engagement through official diplomatic channels within the hour. Then she said something that Groth did not immediately understand because he had no framework for it. She said, "We did not want to do this. We hope we do not have to do it again." Groth had been in command of combat vessels for 27 years. He had fought species that begged for mercy. He had fought species that died in silence. He had fought species that cursed and threatened until the end. He had never once fought a species that expressed regret for winning. He didn't respond. He closed the channel. In the council chamber, the silence had broken, but not into noise, into something more like breathing. The sound of 61 species collectively processing what they had just watched. Councillor Preth sat down. He had been standing for the last 11 minutes and had not noticed. His 4 compound eyes were all fixed on the same display. The tactical overview showed 40 disabled warships in a loose field around a single vessel that had not taken a single point of damage. The numbers under the engagement summary read, Dravosi casualties, 0. Union casualties, 0. His aide placed a data chip on the table in front of him. Fleet registry records, pulled from the Union membership archives. Earth had filed the Relentless under Civilian Deep Space Survey Vessel. Category, Research. Assigned function, Geological Survey of Non-Inhabited Systems. She had been listed that way for 29 years. No one had checked. Why would anyone check the survey vessel registration of a minor member species? Preth's aide leaned close and said quietly, "Counselor, there are now 14 member species requesting emergency diplomatic contact with the human delegation. The Nathali are asking if Earth has additional vessels of this type. The SREN Collective is asking if Earth would consider a mutual defense arrangement." Preth didn't answer. He was looking at the display. Around the disabled Dravosi fleet, the convoy they had come to take was moving again. 41 cargo ships back underway, their courses corrected, heading for the colony worlds that had been waiting for them. Nobody had asked permission. Nobody had waited for instructions. The convoy had simply watched what happened, recognized that the way was clear, and started moving. There was something in that, Preth thought. Something about the nature of the humans that he had been watching for 32 years without actually seeing. They had built a weapon powerful enough to end wars, and the first thing they used it for was making sure a grain shipment got through. Somewhere in the disabled fleet, a Dravosi crew member was receiving medical care transmitted through the one open channel the Relentless had left them. Automated first aid instructions, sent without being asked for, in Dravosi, perfectly formatted for their physiology. Preth looked at that for a long time. Then he called for the full council to reconvene. The first diplomatic query from a non-human government arrived 40 minutes after the engagement ended. Then, 17 more within the hour. By the time Dara Holt walked off the command deck to eat something, her communications officer had a queue of 63 priority messages from 12 different species, and the queue was still growing. None of them were from the Dravosi Dominion. That message came separately, through an older and more formal channel, the kind used for communications between governments that were not yet at war, but were standing very close to the edge of it. The Dravosi High Commander, a being named Sarath, requested a direct line to whoever was responsible for the engagement near Varath's Eye. Dara took the call in a small room off the main corridor with a chair, a table, and nothing else. She sat with her hands folded and waited while the translation buffer synced. Sarath appeared on the display. He was older than Groth, heavier, with a face that carried the particular stillness of someone who had survived long enough in power to stop reacting to things immediately. He looked at Dara for several seconds before he spoke. He asked how many ships Earth had like the Relentless. Dara said 1. He did not believe her. She could see it in the way his eyes moved, calculating, reassessing. He said that a species willing to show a weapon was usually willing to show only the smaller part of what it had. Dara said she understood why he thought that. She said it was not the case. She said Earth had built one ship with one purpose, and that purpose was not conquest. He asked what the purpose was then. She said to make sure no one tests us. Then she paused, and to make sure we only have to say that once. There was a long silence on the channel. Then Sarath asked about the 40 ships, about the crews. He asked in a tone that was not quite gratitude and not quite accusation, the tone of someone who could not process a defeat without a single death. Dara told him the crews were healthy. She told him the ships would be returned once the Union review was complete. She told him the corridor attacks had killed approximately 1,400 people, and that Earth expected that number to be addressed in any final agreement, not as a punishment, but as an acknowledgement. Sarath was quiet for a moment. Then he said he would speak with the Union Council. The call ended. Dara sat in the room for another few minutes, not thinking about the Dravosi, thinking about Oren, who was 2 decks above her right now doing system reviews and almost certainly not sleeping, thinking about the crew of 4,200 who had spent years or decades in a dead star system, waiting for a moment that they had all privately hoped would never come. She went back to work. The council session was the most unusual in 30 years of Preth's tenure, and he had attended sessions that included a live hostage situation, and one that had been interrupted by a species announcing its own extinction. Councillor Preth had called it expecting demands, from the species who felt deceived by Earth's hidden ship, from the ones who felt threatened, from the ones who simply wanted to know what else humanity was hiding. He had prepared for a difficult room. The room was not difficult, it was something stranger. It was quiet. The delegates who spoke did so carefully. The elder representative of the Lethani, an aquatic species that had occupied their council seats for longer than most member species had been in space, asked to address the floor first. Her name was Sue. She spoke slowly and always had, because her translator took extra seconds to render her species' layered vocal harmonics into something the room could understand. She said the Lethani had known, not the details, but they had watched humanity for 40 years and seen something consistent, a species that responded to near extinction not with aggression outward, but with preparation inward. A species that kept showing up to help other people's crises with doctors and food and engineering support, year after year, while quietly building something they hoped to never use. She said the Lethani had chosen not to report what they suspected, because a species that builds power and waits to be provoked was, in her experience, the rarest and most trustworthy kind. Preth watched the room process that. Then he asked the question he had been holding since the engagement ended. He walked to the human delegation's table. For the first time in 32 years, he had ever crossed the floor to address a minor member directly, and he asked Dara Holt, who had returned to the chamber with a calm that he found unreasonably irritating. If Earth had only ever wanted to protect itself, why did the relentless come when Union ships were threatened? Why not wait until the Dravosi reached human space? Dara looked at him for a moment, then she said, because 1,400 people were already dead, because a convoy was about to be taken, because we were ready and we were there. She paused. We are not just trying to protect Earth, Counselor. We have lived in this community for 40 years. It is our community too. Preth did not respond immediately. He returned to his station. He sat down. At the edge of the chamber display, a new alert was already forming, a signal, faint and strange, arriving from the unmapped dark beyond the galactic rim. Something was coming from a direction that appeared on no chart. Something large, moving with purpose. The room did not panic. 61 delegates turned, slowly and without discussion, and looked at the human delegation. Dara was already reading the signal data. The signal did not repeat. That was the first thing that made it strange. Every known deep space transmission, biological or automated, repeated. You sent a signal because you wanted it received, and you kept sending it to improve the odds. But this one had come once, at a specific frequency that matched no Union standard, carrying a data structure that no species in the chamber had ever encountered, and then gone silent. The second thing that made it strange was the size of whatever was producing it. The mass displacement readings from the outer sensor buoys put the source at somewhere between a large asteroid cluster and a small moon system, except it was moving in formation, not drifting, not orbiting, moving together in a pattern toward the inner rim, toward inhabited space. Toward them, the Union's chief science delegate, a Nathali named Wren, small, gray-skinned, with eyes that processed light in 4 spectrums, stood at her station and presented the data in a voice she was working very hard to keep steady. She said the formation had been moving for approximately 3 years, based on back-calculated trajectory. She said it would reach the outer inhabited corridor in approximately 8 months. She said her analysis team had run the data against every first contact database in Union archives and found nothing that matched. Something was coming from the dark that the galaxy had never seen before. The vote to ask Earth's admiral to lead an investigative intercept was not unanimous. Preth had expected at least 4 dissenting votes from species that were still processing their feelings about the hidden supercarrier. He got 1. Counselor Preth cast his own vote last. He was the kind of person who believed in watching all the other votes before adding his own, not because he was indecisive, but because he believed information was still information even at the last moment. He watched 59 other delegates vote yes. He thought about 32 years of watching a species he had dismissed, misread, and underestimated. He thought about the convoy moving again. He thought about automated first aid instructions sent in Dravosi to enemies who had just tried to destroy them. He voted yes. Dara received the vote result on the command deck of the Relentless and did not appear surprised. She was standing beside Orin at the navigation station, the two of them looking at the same signal data on the same display. And when the council authorization came through, she simply nodded and told him to begin plotting an intercept course. Orin looked at the data for another moment. Do we know what we're heading toward? No. Do we have a plan for first contact with an unknown entity of that size? We have a framework, and we have time to build a better one on the way there. Orin thought about that, then he started plotting the course. Dara walked to the observation deck, a long, narrow room along the upper hull of the Relentless, with a full transparent wall facing forward. She did not stand at it the way people stood at windows when they were thinking. She stood the way a person stands when they are ready to move and are simply waiting for the ground to catch up with them. The Relentless was already turning. She turned the way she did everything slowly, with enormous patience, covering space that would have taken other vessels several maneuvers. Her engines built to full power over 15 minutes. Her forward array lit up in the soft gold of active long-range sensing. Her crew moved through their stations with the quiet efficiency of people who had trained for exactly this, not this specific thing, but the general shape of it, the unknown. Back on orbital station Verath, Counselor Preth stood at the observation window of his private office and watched the Relentless complete her turn. His young aide stood behind him. She had joined his staff 8 months ago, fresh from the Velunian Academy, full of opinions about species rankings and military power assessments. She had been quieter since this morning. She asked him the question he had been waiting for someone to ask. If they find something out there, something even they cannot handle, what do we do? Preth watched the Relentless begin to accelerate, watched her hull catch the light of the nearest star, a long, slow gleam traveling the length of 14 kilometers of hull from bow to stern, like something being acknowledged. He thought about her answer before he spoke. He thought about a species that had lost hundreds of thousands of people and responded by building one ship, not a weapon, a ship, and crewing it with people who chose that life willingly, generation after generation, in silence. We do what we should have been doing for 40 years, he said. We help. The Relentless crossed the light threshold. She did not vanish dramatically. She did not leave fire or noise behind her. She simply accelerated until she was very small, and then she was not there anymore. The space where she had been was ordinary space, just distance and light and the slow drift of the disabled Dravosi fleet still waiting for its rescue ships. The aide said nothing. She was looking at the empty space. Preth left the window and went back to his desk. There was still the matter of the Dravosi Treaty, the reparations review, the 14-member species who wanted emergency consultations. The galaxy did not stop requiring management simply because something extraordinary had happened. But the window stayed in his mind, the image of that hull catching the light before it disappeared into the dark, the way a candle looks for a moment before you cup it, bright and sure of itself, moving toward something it cannot yet see. He opened the treaty file and began to read.